that turnover that people that want to move to New York can, that people that need a new apartment or a new house can find the one that fits them, is crucial to the economic dynamism of the city. We can't continue to grow the city's economy. We can't continue to have people here unless we have housing that's provided. And so that's why I'm really happy to be here with all of you. My focus, along with many in the legislature this year when it comes to housing, is making sure that we are getting the cost of providing housing under control. We've seen insurance rates skyrocket with no real end in sight in how they're going up. We've seen delays in actually having to service the housing. I personally want to make sure that, especially when it comes to home ownership, that we can have the turnover that we need in home ownership, that there's supply on the market. We've obviously been locked in because of interest rates and other reasons. We don't see people willing to move, and we got to find ways to actually make sure we have that dynamism in the market. And we also just need to make sure that there's always growing supply. While in most cities we can say, oh, you know, there are enough units for the number of people that want to live there, that is not true in New York City. For the first time since last year, we actually have more New Yorkers who are homeless than we have vacant apartments in the city. So even by the raw math of can we house everyone, not even if we have, you know, slack in the market, we need to find ways to build new homes, and I'm really focused on that. On the insurance front, this is a difficult problem. I don't need to tell all of you that. I sit on the insurance committee. I'm involved with the National Conference of Insurance Legislators. This is a national and international problem. There are obviously regulations in New York we should be looking at and finding ways to loosen up that market. We also need to be realistic about the reinsurance market and what that is doing and driving up the costs for insurance, where you have certain insurance providers that used to say 30 cents of every premium dollar went to reinsurance, and now it's 85 cents. And that's being blown up by capital requirements in other states not being there, more payouts coming because of changes in the environment. And we need to find a way to isolate the problems that are happening in other states so that they're not bleeding into what we're seeing in New York, and finding ways to mitigate there. I also want to talk briefly about housing court, which has been log jammed and is not serving the interests of anyone right now. And that's a really problematic system because it's important to actually have movement in the courts itself. There are a couple things I'm looking at here. One is we just need more judges. The backlog to get access to a part, to get a case going, is far too long. That's throughout the entire court system. In housing court, that's mostly a political problem, but there's also other places in the court system where we're actually bound by statute, or in one case, the Constitution, which bans us from adding more judges. And one of the things that I pushed for last year and will continue to push for this year is an amendment that gets rid of the limit on state Supreme Court judges in the state Constitution, which bans us from adding any new state Supremes in Manhattan, the Bronx, or the Capital Region. Queens, you still have a few more seats we're trying to fill. But we need to get rid of that to unlock the courts so they can actually move forward. And we need to find a way to reduce property taxes where we can. Now, I'm not going to jump into the whole New York City property tax reform effort because, as I said, I have to go. I don't have 8 hours. But we do need to find ways where we can pick apart places because we cannot just keep pushing up insurance costs and property tax costs and all of this, and then especially for our rent-regulated providers, say, but there's no increase in rent, right? That is a way to have more of the market locked up and fewer units actually available for people, and that serves no one. So I could go into a bunch more detail on those, but I actually think it'd be more fun to open it up for any questions that people have, and we can kind of direct things to where we go from there. But I just want to kind of end the prepared remarks where I started, which is y'all are really important partners in making sure we have a housing system and a housing supply that actually supports the economic growth of New York City, and I'm excited to work with all of you to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
My name's Les Lerner. I've got a question. It's not to say that housing court doesn't need more judges, but when a judge in housing court listens to a case and due to a tenant's baloney story reschedules for 2 months later, listens to the baloney story again, reschedules for 2 months later, listens to the story again, reschedules, and I'll keep going until we've gone to 6 rescheduled dates in front of the judge, taking the judge's time The case is now a year old and we've gone nowhere. That has nothing to do with not enough judges. Because if that judge handled the case, he could have handled about 3 cases during that time. So if every judge didn't, I'm clearly of the opinion that somebody whispered into all these judges' ears, nobody gets evicted, do whatever it takes. Because the delays and the excuses, none of them have to do with a lack of judges. It has to do with them not wanting to pull the trigger. And for all the Bronx Housing Court judges to not wanting to pull the trigger, somebody whispered something in their ear. Somebody. And that's the problem. So if they're telling you the problem in the courts is that we don't have enough judges, I think they're playing with you and all the other elected officials. Because I'm telling you what's really going on, and I'm telling you I have 20% of all my tenants not paying rent and haven't paid rent for a year or two, and the cases go nowhere, but yet the judges are spending all this time. And that's before we get into all the other issues relating to problems with tenants these days. So that's the real problem.
I hear you on that entirely. There are many problems with housing court. I think we can agree. I didn't whisper in any judge's ear. I don't know. No. I know. I know you didn't. But I'm just. But yeah, and I hear you. If they're not carrying out their job, they're not carrying out their job. That's a separate problem, and adding more of them won't fix that problem. The piece I want to fix is if it shouldn't be a 2-month delay between each segment there. And another piece, which again, I don't think gets into, if the fundamental and only problem is judges are not doing their job, I don't actually have a solve for that. And I would love to hear solutions. But if there's capacity things, and then the other bit that I would point out is how many people also like own property or work in Jersey? Anyone? Yeah? Do you have a different feeling in the Jersey housing court? Yeah. And listen, I'm a New Yorker and I'm about to say something nice about Jersey. So, it's like I'm doing it. It's tough. But one of the things Jersey Housing Court has done is, again, there are real political problems with what people are willing to do, right? We can admit that. It is perhaps more politically palatable to think about the non-monetary evictions, the tenants that are not following the rules of the lease, that are being a nuisance for all of the other tenants in there, right? That becomes sort of a set of issues that can unite many different parts of the political spectrum and can actually be seen as pro-tenant. And Jersey has recently been really expediting the non-monetary evictions as a way of at least having some of that logjam go through. So I've been looking at how much of that is statute or regulation or just culture, and is there room there? Because if you have a nuisance tenant that's making things awful for you and all of your tenants, like no one's benefiting from keeping that person there. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Hi, Assemblyman. Thanks for being with us and always being able to listen and lead. Obviously, Les brings up a big point. We do have tenants in both in housing court for both reasons, and it is frustrating. I know eviction diversion is something that we're having a lot of conversations in the industry about, working with the city, the state, on how can we come up with ways to divert people from getting evicted, because that's really not the ultimate goal. Of course, it's a loss for everyone. So, totally. But I want to pivot towards. I know you mentioned you're on the insurance committee. You brought up a huge problem in the industry. Essentially, the cost of insurance in the Bronx is sky high and vastly different than the rest of the city. Tort reform, I know, is a huge problem and one that's difficult to tackle. But in the Bronx, it's a real issue. But so I wonder if maybe you could go a little deeper into the issue on insurance, both from a redlining standpoint as opposed to other ideas we can come up with to work together. Because I have one building now which we're going to sell because it had a fire, its rates went up, and it's 3 times the rates of buildings that would be in Manhattan and Upper Manhattan even, and it's just not sustainable.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hear more thoughts since I know
Yeah,
that's
and what I'm about to share are just thoughts. They're not. I don't know exactly what's going to work here, but they're things I'm looking at to do it right. And handling redlining, both what was explicit and what was implicit, is a key portion of that. And one of the ways we are still bearing the burden of that is just this lack of competition in the insurance space, where you have one or two providers you can turn to, and so they can name their rates and they just keep jacking them up. Tort reform is a big piece of that, as you mentioned. One of the things that I am thinking most about is, insurance rates are going up everywhere. And we can talk about what's specific in New York, and there certainly are things that are specific in New York, but this is really like a nationwide increase in rates. And one of those drivers has been the reinsurance market getting completely out of whack with what they are charging. And that is how the risks across different insurance markets end up getting transferred, right? Because I had always heard insurance rates are going up because of hurricanes in Florida. It's like, what does that have to do with New York property, right? But the place it does have to do is that reinsurance firms insure across every line of risk and across every geography. And so if they are paying out more, there's the one piece, which is they're paying out more, but there's the second piece, that their models for how much they're going to pay out are no longer predictive, because they're based on pre-global warming predictions, and they are now saying, okay, not only are we increasing, but we don't know for sure how much we are going to have to pay in the worst case scenario, and we need to raise our rates to pay for that. And so one of the things that is being talked about at a national level, but I would also love to see what we could do in the state level, is can we cap that worst case scenario for reinsurance so that they don't have as much risk, they can bring down their rates, and that can get passed through. So there's conversations actually led mostly by red states, surprisingly enough, of doing national programs of, if you were to get to climate change of a certain amount or hurricanes of a certain level, that the federal government would step in and actually stabilize the market. And that would allow reinsurance to say, well, we know we're not going to pay more than X. And so that means we can lower our rates across everything, and hopefully that can pass through. Again, this is like 3 levels removed from the exact rate you're paying. But this is such a big problem, we have to look at all of the different ways that we can solve it.
Thank you, Assemblyman, for coming. It's not so much a question, it's an issue that I want to bring to your attention. It has to do with tax abatement. We're glad that the 421A was extended. Now it's 485X. But there's another issue concerning tax abatement, and that is buildings that had gotten tax abatement 10, 11, 12 years ago. We have a building in East Harlem that 11 years ago we finished, and we had a 15-year tax abatement. And the way the old program worked, after 10 years, your assessment was gone up 20% a year for 5 years. Well, this building in East Harlem on Pleasant Avenue, in 2022, our taxes were $3,115. The abatement is then now starting to burn off. In 2023, those taxes went up to $69,645.68.
Oh my gosh.
In 2024, the new taxes are now up to $142,188. Now, to go from $3,100 to $142,000 in 3 years is something that's not sustainable. So, and in fact, when the tax abatement burns off, the taxes will be $350,000. I'm reading from tax bills. So I know this is an issue we've started to discuss with some of the other legislators, but perhaps we can meet with you and go over some means of extending the tax abatement while at the same time maintaining affordability through a regulatory agreement.
Yeah, I'd love to have that conversation, and I think when government is asking you to provide affordable housing, it's appropriate for government to be spending some of its resources to do that. So the abatements and the regulatory agreements, I think, are a good way to go, and would love to chat more about that.
Thank you, Senator, for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
Let's give him a nice applause, please. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Eliezer Rodriguez. I'm the Regional Government Affairs Director and Director of the Bronx chapter of the Hudson Goodway Association of Realtors. This is the 8th year we have hosted a legislative breakfast, the past 3 years in partnership with the Queens Bronx Building Association. Throughout those years, Gary Axelbank has been the moderator. Gary needs no introduction, but he insisted on one. Gary Axelbank has been a friend for over 25 years. Gary is the host and senior producer of Bronx Talk, the borough's flagship talk show on BronxNet television. Since the program's debut, Gary has hosted more than 1,460 weekly editions covering political debates, programs on crime and policing, youth, parks, healthcare, and a range of community issues. In fact, this Thursday, this Thursday is the 30th anniversary of Bronx Talk. That is a heck of an accomplishment, and it deserves an applause. Gary is also the host of the Bronx Buzz on BronxNet, a weekly reporters roundtable, and he is the host of the Bronx Music Podcast. Gary is the recipient of many awards and recognized more than once by the city and state as one of the 50 most influential people in the borough of the Bronx. Gary is a lifelong Bronxite. Please welcome the political voice of the Bronx, Mr. Gary Axelbank.
Hi, everybody. I love how Ellie said he needs no introduction, but then you went all about doing it. Anyway, listen, this is somebody's phone. Is this a gift? Oh, okay. You just got a text from your wife. Anyway, nice to see everybody. I don't want to take a lot of time because it's really not about me speaking today, even though I speak a lot. I see so many friends around the room. Because yes, I guess I've moderated this thing many years. I don't have to tell you about opportunities for development in the Bronx, opportunities to do the right thing for our communities. And one of the things that makes me very happy about being part of this event every year is that we have people who really want to do the right thing. And that is pretty exciting because we work so hard to do the right thing in the Bronx. I'm going to introduce a couple of people who want to have a couple of words with you. So first of all, the CEO of the Hudson Gateway Association of Realtors, it is Linda Fernandez. Yes, of course.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. So I've been at HEAR, it was a year on September 1st. And I think from the moment I got here, I found the Bronx to have great legacy, but also great potential and opportunity, as Gary said. And so I'm extremely honored and grateful to work with all of the leaders of the Bronx, the HEAR Bronx chapter, and to be part of that future and that opportunity for the Bronx. And I just don't want to forget a couple things. Here we go. I wanted to thank the Queens and Bronx Building Association for co-hosting this legislative breakfast with HEAR, in particular Richard Sika and Robert Altman for working with Ellie Rodriguez in planning and gathering our impressive panel of elected leaders. And I also wanted to point out that this will be Ellie's last legislative breakfast, and because he's going on to be judge, and we're extremely proud of him and excited for him. So thank you, Ellie, for everything you have done for the Bronx Association, for the Bronx chapter, and we wish him the very best in his future. And I also wanted to just say that this is a very powerful event for us. It allows our members to voice their issues. It allows us to work together with elected officials to advance our mission. And I just want to thank everyone who's here for attending, for participating, and the leadership for how powerful you've made this chapter and for how powerful we will be in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do want to recognize, as Linda said, the Queens Bronx Building Association. And so let's invite the president, Scott Friedenberg, to join us. I don't know Scott. Here he is. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. I'm going to be very, very quick. As new president of Queens Bronx Building Association just in September, this is my first event here in the Bronx. So I'm excited to be here. I think that, first of all, and thank you to Hudson Gateway. I think it's a great effort for the two organizations to bring a lot of people together here for some really powerful information that was mentioned earlier. This relationship is consistent with my beliefs of, basically having other organizations and other associations that you combine your efforts with that are going to benefit the membership of both organizations. So it's consistent with my beliefs, like-minded associations joining together for a great cause. I think that there's a lot of great information that's going to happen today. And thank you for everyone being here today.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Congressman Richie Torres is busy, but our friend Joe McManus is here. You want to say a couple of words, Joe, on behalf of the congressman? You could applaud for Joe McManus. My goodness. Guy's been here for even longer than me. So what's that?
I said, Gary does lots of things. He even helps in the Van Cortlandt Alliance because I lead bird walks there, so I see him there all the time. Yeah, good morning. My name is Joseph McManus, and I represent Congressman Torres. Just to let you know, he is on two committees. He's on one select committee, the China Committee. Now, he was appointed by the Republicans, so he has very good rapport with all the members of Congress. And secondly, he's on the Financial Services Committee. So every year they go out to Rocket Mortgages. It's out in the West somewhere. And he's very familiar with any kind of financial things. He, and from my opinion, I met a few of the congressmen on the Financial Services Committee, and they're really committed to helping people. They're really committed to helping the public. They're committed to making sure the financial system works well for everybody. And one other thing about the congressman, which I really know well, is that anytime he promotes a bill or puts a bill up, he always makes sure that there's a Republican co-sponsor. That I know, especially with the Medicare bill, and just recently the lithium-ion battery bill just passed the House of Representatives tremendously, like 400, and I don't know, it was overwhelmingly. It's in the Senate right now. There's one senator that's holding it up, but Ted Cruz. Somebody wanted to know. Yeah, Ted Cruz. And so we're hoping that, they'll see that this is a bipartisan type of thing. People are dying from fires. So that's very important. And thank you very much for your time. And do good with real estate. That's how that's how I was able to retire early. Real estate is a great thing. Thank you. Where'd Gary go? Oh, there he is.
I'll keep that in mind. Let's see. We want to say just to acknowledge our VP of Marketing Communication of Hagar is Liz Pollock. Where's Liz? You can raise your hand. Hi, Liz. And Assembly Member Alex Boris from Manhattan, right? Is that where he's from? Was here, sent regards. He had to leave early. I want to introduce our legislators who are here from the 32nd Senatorial District. It is Senator Louis Sepulveda. Nice to see you. Now your number I remember because I live in that district. It's the 81st Assembly District. It's Assemblyman Jeffrey Dinowitz. Can I tell our secret? We went to junior high school together. So we know each other a lot longer than I know most of you. And when they had, that's right, when it was called junior high school. And also, I live in Eric Dinowitz's district, the 11th, right? The 11th City Council District. Thank you, sir, for joining us this morning. So what we're going to do, some of these questions, which largely regard legislation, we will ask. We'll let each of the legislators respond, and then certainly take questions. And if you have questions or want to make comments about any of the things that we're working on, that would be great. Many New Yorkers hope to achieve their dream of home ownership. As you all well know, they face many obstacles, including some of the highest in the nation property taxes, and what you folks know very well, closing costs. There is a need to support legislation that will help overcome these obstacles to home ownership. There's also a need to support legislation to combat all forms of illegal discrimination in housing. Some pursue their dream of home ownership by purchasing a co-op. There are options out there. So there's a bill sponsored by Senator Kavanaugh and Assemblymember Levine to ensure fairness and transparency in the co-op housing purchase process. This bill establishes a clear timeline for the response to applicants by co-op boards, and it requires a reason for any denial of an application in order to help combat illegal housing discrimination. A similar city council bill is needed as well. So let's start with you, Senator Sepulveda. What do you think? Would you support a bill? Is this what we need? And what are your concerns? There's a microphone.
Thank
there.
you. First of all, I want to thank everyone. I want to congratulate Eliezer. I know him for 20 years, and I'm very proud of him, and I'm happy to see that he's following in his wife's footsteps. So this is my 7th appearance. I think I missed one because I was ill. And I talk regularly about the fact that I have the district, the most tenants in the entire state of New York. 96% of my constituents are renters. So housing is extremely important to my district. It's the poorest district. I know he talked about legislation. I too have a bill on condo transparency. But right now I can tell you that I'm working for the last 2 years on a bill that's going to completely change the property tax system here in New York City. I've been working with the administration. I've been working with the governor's office. It's a very comprehensive bill. We had a meeting last week with all the government groups and with the governor's office. We are 98% of the way completed with the bill. We intend to introduce it immediately when session starts. But as a result of that bill, it's going to decrease taxes in 70% of city residents in the entire city of New York. 70% are going to see a significant decrease in their tax bills when the bill becomes effective. I urge you to keep an eye on it. We're gonna have a press conference. We're gonna release the information. I'm doing it as the chair of the city's committee in the New York State Senate. That is one of the ways where we're gonna make it easier for people to have home ownership. As a person who practiced off in housing court and in the real estate industry, I have a perspective that maybe some of my colleagues don't have. I've said again that part of the problem with the real estate industry is the real estate industry is considered the boogeyman or the boogie woman. And that perception creates a lot of problems. It creates problems for us as legislators because we have to answer to our constituency. And so we have to make sure that what we do is going to be fair to the people that we represent, which is the majority of the people that we represent. With condos, myself living in a condo, I know many of the problems. I've proposed the bill again for transparency, give reasons why people are rejected or not. I'll give a lot of information about the annual costs and the common charges and so forth, things like that. So we know what we want to do. We know that has to get done because in many instances, I've had people that have complained about things like they weren't given a reason why or they weren't given information. And so I appreciate that there's a bill that was mentioned. I also have a bill. I don't care which bill passes as long as it leads to transparency. Many of us here understand the crisis that we have now with housing and with the real estate industry. The biggest problem that we have is politics. There are some rational measures you can take. There's rational policies you can engage in. There's rational legislation that you can pass. The problem that we have is this, it could be rational, but it'd be a political problem for all of us. So what we have to do as legislators is we have to try to find that point that is palatable to the industry and, of course, to the people that we represent as tenants. And we're going to continue to work on that. Session is going to start in a couple of months. As the chair of the cities committee, I'm going to continue to delve into issues that legislation and things like that we know can help the industry and can help our tenants and can be a plus for the entire city of New York. I also I am a member of the Judiciary Committee for the New York State Senate. And through that committee, we also propose legislation, policy, and deal with budgets so that we can help the real estate industry and our tenants. We're going to continue to do that. I don't profess to know everything about the real estate industry, so if there's anything that you as a group or individually want to propose, any ideas that you have, you can all contact my office at any time that you want. And I'd be happy to explore anything that you consider that could be a better option or another way so that everyone is happy or everyone's unhappy, which means it's good. But certainly we're going to continue to work with those on those ideas and continue to develop ideas like that so that everybody can profit, the real estate industry can profit, and our tenants can live happy lives. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to be the first person to vote on October 26th early voting for Ellie Rodriguez, because once I cast my one vote, he will have been elected because there's not a lot of opposition from the other parties. But I'm very happy for your success, and we have a good batch of people running for judge this year. So both council member Dinowitz and I can only stay for a few minutes. Why? Because today's our flu shot day. So we're going all the way across the Bronx to give out flu shots to our constituents, because in our district, we don't like any disease running around. And it took us 45 minutes to drive here. So you do the math. It's at 10 o'clock flu shots. But let me try to address the question. And first, I just want to start by saying that I do represent an enormous number of tenants. Most of my constituents are tenants, but I have a good mix. I have a lot of co-ops, condos, single-family homes. So we have a diverse constituency in terms of housing. And we try to address everybody's issues, and we try to balance. One can be pro-tenant and still be sensitive to the needs and to the importance of realtors, of the real estate industry, and there are a lot of things that we should be doing. But specifically to the question, I don't support that legislation, and I'll tell you why. Number one, I used to be on a co-op board, and I can assure you that if that legislation were passed, most people would not want to serve on co-op boards. At least that's what I think, because they'll be afraid of getting sued. It's easy to say people should get an explanation as to why they're rejected. The truth is, and I know a lot of co-op board presidents, including my chief of staff, the vast majority of people who are rejected are rejected on the basis that the co-op board doesn't believe that they have the income to make the monthly maintenance payments. It's one thing having money to put down to buy the co-op, but you want to make sure you have people moving in who can then afford to stay there. And if the co-op boards had to give an explanation, I'm sure that would be the explanation most of the time anyway, but certainly all of the time if that legislation were in effect. So I don't know that it would actually accomplish the goals that it would want to accomplish, but I do think people would be nervous about, we're in a very litigious society, and no one wants to get sued. And the other thing is, in terms of the timeline, likewise, I think things should be done quickly, transparently, but sometimes things don't move as quickly as we'd like. I mean, we went through a pandemic recently. That type of thing slows things down, but there are other things that slow down the process. So while, yes, you want to make sure that these decisions are made quickly, they're not always able to be done that way. And probably much of the time that when things are slowed down, it might be because the applicant is slow in providing information. There are any one of a number of reasons. So it's really important that we enforce the laws that we already have, and we have very strict and appropriate laws against discrimination. And I think if there is ever evidence found to show discrimination, that those people should be dealt with harshly. So this bill, I don't think would really add any of those kind of protections. I don't know what the fate of the bill is going to be. I know it's this bill or bill similar to it have been around for a while, and I think a lot of people who represent a lot of co-ops recognize the pitfalls of the legislation. But again, it's well intentioned. I mean, I'm very supportive of my two colleagues who sponsor the bill, but no, I don't support that.
And that still got applause. That's amazing. Taking notes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Dinowitz, council member for the Northwest Bronx. It's good to see a number of familiar faces and of course, new faces. Luckily, I don't have to vote on that legislation. But there is similar legislation in the city council that's being proposed. I'm not sure if it's proposed this session. There was one proposed last session. And I think what Senator Sepulveda said is actually, I think, an important message, which is politics sometimes gets in the way of things. I met with a number of co-op board presidents in my district, and we have a number of co-ops. And they met with legislators who are sponsoring this bill, chair of the housing committee, for example. And they shared a lot of the concerns Assemblyman Dinowitz said. And some of them are, I think, real, right? If putting a timeline on, they said, by the time we get the application from the management company, for example, it may have already been that 45 days. Maybe it's over the summer. The co-op presidents I know are very reasonable and do all the things that are outlined in this bill, in the timeline bill anyway. They do these things with very hastily, I think. Not hastily, very quickly. And that gives the applicant, assurances whether or not they've applied. And I think typically, if they don't get the interview, it's, as the Assemblyman said, because of finances. And so I think most reasonable people do actually interview and give an answer within a certain time frame. I think a lot of the questions come down to details, which, at least in the city council bill, just simply aren't there, and would, as it was written in the 22-23 session, put an undue burden on the co-op board because of things out of their control, which is, I think, the importance of kind of having some of those conversations. I think it's similar with the explaining the reasons. The way the law is written now in the city council, I think they have 5 days to explain the reason. I think it's important to remember that the co-op board presidents are, in fact, volunteers. So where are those areas where you can find common ground to provide protections to people seeking home ownership, making sure, none of you are on the hook for months on end, while providing also those same protections, legally and in terms of workload for essentially volunteers who aren't getting paid for their time. And I think there are areas of common ground, because what it sounds like to me is we are really legislating for the worst actors. One of the things that's helpful to us as legislators is, what is the data? How many of your clients really are waiting months on end for an answer? How many of your clients really are being rejected for reasons unknown? To that end, we in the city council have passed protections for people applying to housing. One of the bills we passed last year, which was pretty controversial, is called the Fair Chance for Housing, which says if you have a criminal record, you can't be discriminated against. We in the city council put in place some, guardrails, I think, to find that common ground between people who said, criminals should never have housing, and people who said you should never be able to consider anything other than whether they're a person or not, and which is true. And we said, after a certain amount of time, if you've paid your debt to society and you've demonstrated that there's no recidivism, they can't look back 20 years to say you can't. You can't live in this place. You can't look back 8 years. The state passed a similar law, not just on housing, but it's called Clean Slate, which is after a certain number of years, your record is sealed, which I think highlights that value we have of serving your time. If you've served your time, that's it. You've served your debt to society and you can start anew. And in fact, in my office, we fund organizations that help provide opportunities for people who are formerly incarcerated. In our budget this year in the city council over the next few years, we're providing $2 billion for investments in affordable housing. We are advocating for more home ownership, for HPD to develop incentives in zoning so that developers are incentivized to actually make co-op and affordable housing that people can purchase and create that generational wealth and create more roots in a community. Right now, all of the incentives for housing seem to be only towards rentals and only towards studios and one-bedroom apartments, which, as many of you know, I'm sure many of you, try to find housing for families. And we know that the new construction coming up is really tough to find because the city incentivizes rentals and they incentivize studio and one-bedroom apartments. So we in the city council are, again, trying to incentivize more of the home ownership. In fact, one of the developments in my community, one of the ULURPs coming up in Wakefield is, I think, 1,100 units, a third of which will be home ownership opportunities. And that's what a lot of us in the city council are looking for. So there are a number of steps we are taking to incentivize home ownership, to prevent housing discrimination, and we are still working to try to find what is that, what is the data to show that the things being the things they're trying to solve for in this legislation really are the barriers and not something else like available of homeownership opportunities, availability of units, and the pricing of units.
Okay, thank you very much. Folks, I want to introduce Landon Dace, who has just joined us from the 77th Assembly District. We're going to ask you the same thing, and so I'll just summarize what we've already heard. There's a bill sponsored by Senator Kavanaugh and Assemblymember Levine to ensure fairness and transparency in the cooperative housing purchase process. The bill establishes a clear timeline for the response to applicants by co-op boards, and it requires a reason for any denial of an application in order to help combat illegal housing discrimination. A similar city council bill is needed. What do you think of this? Would you support it? And if not, what are your concerns?
Good morning, everybody. Apologize for my lateness, school drop-offs. Obviously, any bill that is dealing with any form of discrimination is something that I will always have to consider. Just because as someone who is African-American, I have faced discrimination in my life. Nonetheless, it's very hard to legislate against discrimination in many ways because we all know that you can always create something to deny somebody. All we have to do is find one thing that is somewhat legitimate. I'm a lawyer. I'm very good at just finding one fact pattern which I can use and expound upon and say, this is the reason why you were rejected. So the reality is, in so many ways, this bill is really impacting only in certain areas to a small degree. I wouldn't consider this probably a big issue in my district per se, but in more affluent areas, I remember when my wife and I were trying to buy our co-op, the process, the length and all of that, like we got drawn out. And then that also meant other offers on other properties fell through the wayside at that same time. So I think creating a timeline, a firm timeline, that makes a lot of sense, right? I have a background in affordable housing, I have a background in real estate development, and just from a financing standpoint, if you say this application has to be reviewed, I don't know what this set timeline is, but let's just say 35 to 45 days. That at least gives you, if you're the realtor, if you're the seller or whatever, or the buyer, that gives you a understanding of where you stand. So at the very least, if you are rejected, you can at least move on to your next target property. Second, in reference to discrimination, we have other bills, federal and state on the record, and people will always try to find a loophole. So one thing that we have to do is just have a real conversation from the real estate side. When you're speaking to a board, what is their liability? If they do this the wrong way, why this could be a stick and not a carrot, and explaining that to some of those folks why they need to be inclusive and not exclusive. But at the same time, as a homeowner myself, I understand you want to make sure you have quality applicants, you have quality people in your building. All of that is fair. And the only thing is we want to make sure that it's based off of the true character of the person and not based off of one's own misconception of one's nationality, race, or I think a bigger issue you might see is even one's political views could then become a reason why someone gets rejected. One's a Democrat versus Republican, or other national, international issues that are becoming extremely polarizing in our community. But the last thing also, what I think from a general standpoint, especially specifically in the Bronx and my community, with myself, especially Senator Sepulveda, we also want to make sure that we're training our co-op boards, making sure that they're getting their numbers, their books in order, that they understand how to run a good co-op board, because we have some affordable HDFCs, and we got to make sure those co-op boards are well educated and trained to make sure that those buildings stay maintained and stay to be quality products and within the Bronx. But I think with all my colleagues, I absolutely agree, and we need more home ownership. Co-ops, condos, we need to maybe even figure out some other alternative methods to get people to ownership shares of their buildings or properties. And if we do that, that'll make sure the Bronx is better. Thank you.
Thank you. I will give folks an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. Yes, sir. I'll give you the microphone. I'll run around here. Come on.
Thank you. I'm Brian Phillips. I'm actually based in Upper Manhattan, but I'm part of the Hudson Gateway and serve on the Bronx Advisory Board. I have a question about, given the, in Manhattan, we have 75% co-ops or more. And we have in the Bronx, is it 15, 20%? Given the ongoing concerns about co-op transparency, would it be possible to give clear guidelines on the financial requirements for potential buyers, such as minimum down payment, debt to income ratio, what else? FICO score, debt, and also what am I looking for? Post-closing liquidity, because I don't have that information from managing agents nor co-op boards presidents. I actually have to go to the co-op board president to find out what the down payment is, because the co-op managing agent often gets wrong information. I'm representing a co-op in Riverdale, and the managing agent is telling all the agents it's 20% down, and the board president says it's 90% financing. So I think the information can come directly from the board president.
Somebody want to respond to that? No. Okay.
So in reference to that, again, it comes down to education. The question is, who understands more about the financing for a co-op? The reality is most banks are not going to give 90% LTV to a co-op purchase. Actually, 80-20 is actually quite difficult. And depending on the finances of the co-op, sometimes it can be as high as 60-40, especially as HDFC. Hell, HDFCs has to be 90% cash, which I think is the most ridiculous thing in the world, that you can't get a mortgage for HDFC. Like, you have an income restriction on a co-op, but then you're expecting someone to have 150,000 cash to buy a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. That's just financially infeasible, just from a logical standpoint. But to your point, I think if I was the board president of a co-op and the managing agent, I would probably it's kind of careful. You have to be careful with federal law, but a lot of times co-ops have preferred lenders, and I think in their package they would say what the LTV expectation is for the mortgage, and I think if you put that on the front end, I think the average right now is 70-30, if I'm not mistaken, in most co-ops in the Bronx. Fix me if I'm wrong. It is 80-20. But I think if you go to preferred lenders, 80-20 is the norm. I haven't really seen 90. I really haven't seen 90-10. Even in special programs, they make it very difficult for a 90-10 or even 3.5% down payment on a co-op. I understand. I'm just saying that I can't. There's always going to be examples outside of the norm, but in the median, usually it's 80-20. I think the management agent and the co-op board need to have a one pager that clearly demonstrates what are the lending, to your point, the lending terms that is the normal transaction for their co-op.
How long they take to respond, I mean, that depends on the time of the year, right?
Right, and on the flip side too, the co-op needs to be transparent and give the financials of their co-op, whether they're not, and suddenly you're doing what the co-op, and suddenly you're rate 15, 20% a year. Because their finances are in that situation. I think you need to be transparent on both sides. Okay, thank you. I do want to recognize Ms. Campbell, who's the Chief of Staff from Chantel Jackson, Assembly Member Jackson. There she is. Hello. Thank you for joining us. The next question is about a city council bill, so I think we'll start with the council member. Intro 360, the Fairness in Apartment Rental Expenses Act, FARE, sponsored by Council Member Chi Asi. I hope I pronounced that right. Wouldn't be the first time. What is the correct pronunciation? Chiose. Okay, sorry. Requires that whoever hires a broker in a real estate transaction pays the broker fee. Sponsor argues that there are two reasons for the bill: transparency and fairness. The bill calls for the landlords to pay the broker that they have chosen to rent their apartments. Considering that Intro 360 shifts the burden of broker fees to landlords, what safeguards are in place to prevent landlords from passing these costs on to tenants through higher rents, of course, then worsening the affordability crisis in New York City?
The answer is none. I mean, and this isn't. I'm not on the bill, and that's not a I shouldn't call it a criticism. The sponsor of the bill acknowledges that the rents would or could go up. His argument is that renters would rather have those costs spread out over the term of their lease than pay an upfront cost. That is his argument. I know I've met with a number of you in my office where you shared your concerns for the bill. And look, when you fundamentally change an industry in the city, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of questions that need to be answered, and a lot of seats that need to be at that table. I believe as of now, it does have a majority of the members signed on to it. I don't know if it's a supermajority yet, and you have no internet service in here, so it's really tough to look up. But look, there are. I know you've shared with me a lot of concerns about the bill. But to answer that specifically, yeah, the rents could go up as a result. I think, and I think he acknowledges that.
Let me just do a follow-up. Do you think that the Intro 360 could have a negative impact on small minority-owned independent real estate brokers who may lose significant income if landlords avoid using brokers altogether?
I think from what I've heard from a number of you, the concern is that, right? Where it may be either the part-time or the starting out, real estate agents, the realtors, or people, the bigger companies, I think, would be fine. I think it's what you've all shared with me is the more independent realtors would have a harder time with if this legislation passed. That's what's been shared with me by all of you.
Do you want to weigh in, Assemblyman?
Yeah, I'll weigh in very quickly because we are really going to the flu shots in a minute. So, in theory, it sounds nice. It does. I mean, why shouldn't the person who's trying to rent the apartments be the one who's charged? That's what the bill does essentially. However, it seems to me that it's based upon some unusual situations that occur almost entirely in Manhattan, where enormous fees are charged, and in my opinion, abusive fees. But that's Manhattan. We're the Bronx. I don't know that it's been as much of a problem. What I do know is this. Landlords are able to pass along certain types of costs to renters by the fact that it's not banned. I mean, we've banned passing along charges for air conditioning and automatic legal fees. I know that because those are my bills. But other things, landlords can pass along unless there's some guidance by the state housing, DHCR, that they can't. So if this bill became law, they would just tack it on to the tenants anyway. And if the justification is, oh, well, they'll spread it out, I mean, that's not a very strong argument for it. So it doesn't seem to me that it's going to make a big difference in anybody's lives in the Bronx if that became law.
Cannot afford to have that passed on to them. I understand both sides. We have some homeowners that have not received rent since before COVID. So I understand their portion as well. So there needs to be a balance and an understanding that on both sides where we are challenged financially right now, that if you're passing that cost on to someone who has a few children and they're trying to eat, that's going to be a problem. So I think that that's a nonchalant attitude to the income of what people have in the city. It's become unaffordable on both sides. If you had people living in your home during COVID who never paid, that's a problem. So I think that even when we have programs, it should be put in those programs that they are going to put the money in place to cover these people to live in your unit.
I don't.
It sounds like you're talking about housing costs in general.
I'm talking about housing costs. When you're saying that you're passing, whether this bill passes or not, it's a problem on both sides. It's not just on one side or the other. If people can't afford it, they can't afford it. If someone comes to me and says, listen, I can pay for this for 2 months, but I can't afford your cost, that's a problem. That means that we don't pay.
See, I don't.
It's a problem on both sides.
Right. So meaning, I think this bill. Gary never gets on a microphone. No, I hear you, and that's why I think in the city council we talk so much about the housing costs, because whether the broker fee is on the front end or it's spread out, but with the term of the lease or who pays it, you're right that housing costs are very high, and that's why in the city council and the budget we're investing the $2 billion. In fact, I passed a piece of legislation, which I don't think impacts any of you, but just as a sense of what we're trying to do in the council, makes it sort of automates the process for older adults to apply and qualify for SCREE if they live in a city-run Mitchell-Lama, streamlining that system. That was my legislation. Again, pushing HPD to make term sheets that incentivize homeownership, preventing housing discrimination. This is all steps we're taking in the council to make housing more available and more affordable. And so, again, what you're saying sounds, regardless of whether this passes or not, we have it sure is, and that's why we're working very hard in the council to make housing affordable, and also, by the way, uplift people, because it isn't just about housing costs; it's about making sure people have the skills necessary to get higher paying jobs and degrees. I chair the Committee on Higher Education. A lot of our budget wins deal with programs that keep students in school and allow them to more easily attain their degree with things like advising, more support there. Supporting our higher education system to say more people should earn degrees and earn those higher paying jobs. And in fact, this month we're having a hearing with the Civil Service and Labor Committee to see how can we make sure CUNY and our city's workforce are more aligned to make sure people are lifting themselves up more. So we have housing costs down, people doing better for themselves, and I think those two things in concert will ensure that people will have a better shot at affording the housing that they deserve.
So I don't think that anyone here doesn't believe that there's an issue with cost and housing. I think if you narrow the question to what the bill would do, I think with all due respect to my colleagues in the city council, I think it's a useless bill because there's nothing that's going to prevent the landlord from passing on the costs somehow or other to the tenants. Maybe there are other ways to skin this cat, maybe a cap, maybe a percentage. But, sometimes colleagues, I think, do propose legislation because it'll make them look him or her like a hero. But at the end of the day, I think it's a waste of time. I think we have to have other ways that maybe we can pass or share the costs. But this particular bill in the city council, I think it's useless.
You don't like it. Thank you. I want to introduce Pierina Sanchez, council member from the 14th Council District. Nice to see you. And Assembly Member George Alvarez. Nice to see you, sir. What's the number of your district? 78th. That's right. Okay. There you go. As you do in real life. But this for you, council member, I'm just going to restate the question so you know what we're talking about, but this I'm sure is right up your particular alley. Intro 360, the Fairness in Apartment Rental Expenses Fair Act, sponsored by one of your colleagues, requires that whoever hires a broker in a real estate transaction pays the fee. The sponsor argues there are two reasons for the bill: transparency and fairness. The bill calls for the landlords to pay the broker that they have chosen to rent their apartments. So, what do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you for the royal treatment, Queens and Bronx. I think you saw the belly. Arnold saw the belly and he was like, "What do you want?" So thank you so much for having me, for having us, for having this conversation. I really appreciate it. So you may know that I am the chair of the Committee on Housing and Buildings in the New York City Council. And although I am the chair, this particular bill did not go through my committee. It went through through the Human Rights Committee because it's about transparency and fairness, right? I personally support this bill. I support this bill because, and I love coming to panels where Eric is because he's always prepared, but it's exactly what Eric said, right? It's about smoothing that cost that can be an income shock. I am thinking about, if you know my district, Kingsbridge, Fordham University, you know that we have a median income of $23,000 per worker. 23,000. Imagine trying to survive, feed your family, keep a roof over your head, all of these things with $23,000. Then let's say, you have a change in your life and you try to find somewhere else to live. To come up with $2,000, probably closer to $3,000 today, in addition to that first month of rent, that security deposit, it's really tough. So the income smoothing part of it, that drawing it out, that, building it into another side that's not you because you don't have that in your pocket at the moment, I do support. But it is about the bigger picture, right? I always, I'm sorry if you've heard me say this because politicians tend to repeat ourselves a bit. But, we are facing a housing crisis. And the way that I talk about that is that you don't wake up in the morning, put on your shoes, and walk out the door. If you did, it would be a little strange, right? You need your coat if it's winter. You need your shirt. You need your pants. And the way that we have to tackle the housing crisis is the same as getting dressed in the morning, right? We have to build more. Right? What you all do. We have to preserve. The not sexy part of this crisis is protecting what we have today. And that's why, and kudos to the state legislature for passing the J51 tax incentive. These incentives that come out from the state and that we authorize at the city, I'm currently fighting with all of my colleagues to pass the J51 incentive, right? To provide income, to provide resources for there to be preservation, right? For there to be greening of our buildings, for there to be upgrade of systems, right? And we pass Article 11s all the time, right? To try to lessen the tax burden. But building and preserving is key to the equation. Now, what we build and what we preserve is important too, because I want to know that if we're spending your taxpayer dollars, New Yorkers' taxpayer dollars, that we're getting at people who have the most need, right? There was a lot of talk about 421A last year, right? Might have been 2 years ago. You might have been a part of those debates. And there was a lot of pushback against 421A because we were subsidizing pretty high income housing. That's not what we need to be subsidizing. We need to be subsidizing the communities in the city of New York that are really struggling, the lowest income people all the way to the middle income people. Higher income people, I love you. Congratulations, you make good money, but we have to use our resources in that way. So build and preserve is number one. That's probably like your shirt, right? Then we have to well, building is one and then preserving is the other. So a part of preservation is also about code enforcement. And so that's why I've been laser focused on code enforcement in the city council, because my friends in Albany, y'all took away the city council's power on a lot of housing issues, right? We have ERSTAT, we can't control rents, we can't do a lot of things, but we can preserve. We can make sure that HPD is funded. We can make sure that DOB is funded. So that's where a lot of my efforts have been focused in the New York City Council. And finally, protecting tenants, right? So the harassment, the anti-harassment measures, but vouchers, right? You talked about the folks who are behind on their rent, who haven't been able to pay since the COVID the COVID pandemic. That's really painful, and that's really dangerous for a housing stock, right? Because as people are unable to pay, and we have this problem in affordable housing, we have this problem in market rate housing. As they are unable to pay, our housing stock deteriorates, right? Because you can't maintain it. So I think it's just very important to, we have a bill. We're trying to do income smoothing. That's Chi's thing. I love Chi. I call him the influencer on the city council. He has like 3 million followers. I have like 2,000. You should follow me so I can compete with him. Okay. I think the bill is well intended, but it's so much bigger than that, right? We have to put on all our clothes to deal with the housing crisis.
Boy, I really love that metaphor. I'm trying to picture people walking out with just their shoes on. That's the whole thing. Assemblyman Alvarez, do you want to weigh in on this?
Definitely. Thank you very much for having me here today. Assemblymember Alvarez, I represent Northwest in the Bronx, specifically District 78. I wasn't here when the original question was asked, but I do know and I agree with my councilwoman Pirina Sanchez when she said that we need to preserve what we have built. And that's why last year, I took a couple of real estate developer people here. Actually, Sandra is here, that she was with me. And we presented to the Mayor Adams last year a plan how to put those vacant units back to the market. And when we went to the mayor, he was kind of agree that he's going to create some sort of incentive for those apartments to go back to the market. However, the intention that we were looking for was $75,000 to put the vacant units back to the market. He approved $25,000. So right now, whoever want to put the vacant apartment back, you have $25,000 incentive. But we didn't stop on that. We went to the governor, and we took the same people who went to the mayor. We put in front of the governor, and the governor approved. I believe it was between $25,000 and $50,000 on top of what the mayor of the city approved to put those vacant units back to the market. Because I'm a big believer that, when we fight public safety, a lot of people talk about more cops, more criminal justice reform and stuff like that. But I believe that if you have secure roof, if you have food, if you have jobs, that's part of public safety. And that's what I focus more on, preserve what we have and keep building, like Pirina said. So, and completely agree with that.
Great. Thank you very much. Do folks, anybody have questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Go ahead. You don't need the mic. Just do it. Okay.
Musical chairs.
Supply is a really important part of this. You briefly mentioned it. Maintaining existing apartments is also hard for building owners. I'm all for all the incentives that are going on to reduce rents, save rents, help the people who can't pay their rent. I come from a pretty difficult background myself. But, however, if you don't feed the other side of that economic question, you're not going to solve the problem. And almost everything I hear, and again, I do not understand the real estate market. I'm not a real estate broker, and all I want to do is build a building. I have a bunch of them still sitting on my desk. They can't get filled. They're inadequate to meet the housing crisis, which is the worst we've had since after the Great Depression. Yep. Zoning is 20 years behind, and they admit it, and we admit it in zoning. And they're about to maybe move that other portion March, February, you may see finally a break. There's very little land that's not developed in the city of New York. This is New York. It is not upstate New Jersey or Pennsylvania. There's very little land left. Preservation is great. They do a lot of preservation work for various reasons. However, and once somebody buys their very first little house, political, no matter who they are, no matter where they come, no matter their race, creed, color, economic background, they don't want to live.
So what is your question? I just want to move it forward.
There not more effort in this group to move the zoning process along of political nonsense and encourage increased density. Every project is sitting waiting. They're not financially possible in today's economy without being able to add more units to the space. I know there's nothing going on, and I know it's political.
Thank you. Anybody want to respond? You got the microphone there. It seems to be within your
Never let it go. And
within your realm.
Thank you. I'm going to ask to put you in a bottle and take you everywhere that I go, because this is a really hard conversation, right? So as I mentioned, I'm the chair of Housing and Buildings in the City Council, and we have these City of Yes for economic opportunity, City of Yes for resilience, and City of Yes for housing opportunity, right? So the first two text amendments have passed. They're supposed to make it easier, loosen the zoning envelope so that we can do more and have more flexibility to meet the city's climate goals, to create jobs. The third one is supposed to be about building more housing. And I suspect that even on well, I don't know about this particular panel. I know, Councilmember Dinowitz, who stepped away, has a lot of concerns with the City of Yes for housing proposal. But you're absolutely right. We in the City of New York restrict how much, as you all know, how much we can build, where we can build it. And we have all kinds of weird rules and use groups and zoning. And I'm an urban planner, by the way. So I'm like, yeah, architect, urban planners, we're friends. So, I come from this perspective that we do live in the city of New York, and we are a dense city, although we have neighborhoods that they look more suburban, right? And that's where the resistance is coming from. When you ask about the politics, that's where the resistance is coming from. But I just want to be clear, right? We have, the mayor who's involved and occupied in many different ways that are problematic for us moving work forward at this moment. See, this is a diplomatic, right? Politician. It's making it like just what the mayor is facing right now in the administration and the chaos that is happening in City Hall is making it difficult to move any priority, not to mention one that is controversial. So if this amendment were to be put for a vote today, it would not pass. And I can tell you because I have a spreadsheet and I've been talking to every single member and trying to understand what is your concern? How can we get you there? What do you need to see? Like I think we need to do something about the housing crisis, right? So just from that perspective, I can tell you the what's happening in City Hall is not helpful for driving forward what we need to do as a city. And there are controversial pieces of this the zoning reform. But the last thing I want to say about the zoning reform is I want to put it in context. We're talking about 100,000 units over the next 10 years. That is not a lot, right? Because when we talk about what we need to do as a city, we think that we need to have a minimum of 500,000 units over the next 10 years. So this zoning text amendment could, it's not like now we passed the zoning amendment, now you must build and here's the money. No, it's just zoning relief, right? It's just making it a little easier. So making it a little easier, but just a little. And when we're talking about the low density communities, those communities that have 1 and 2 family homes, we're talking about legalizing the ability to turn your garage into a unit, to build an accessory dwelling unit in the back, right? We're not talking about putting up, 10-story buildings next to your 2-story house. So that gets lost as a part of the conversation. So as you all are working with your clients, as you all are speaking to other New Yorkers, tell them, like, this is not changing the world. This is like tying your shoelaces in the housing crisis, right? This is not the shirt, this is not the coat. This is a small piece of the puzzle, but a necessary one that, I don't agree with everything in the proposal right now, but I do think we need to get to a yes because we need to pass. We need to build more.
Thank you.
So I'll push back a little bit on that. So she has an urban planner. I have my master's in real estate development from Columbia. Professor Bruckner, who ran my program, always said that development is an art, and we have to have mixed housing. So that proposal, to my colleague, my city council colleague's point, is that it's not what, you're going to suddenly take one-story building and build 10 stories, but at the same time, that is happening, right? In my neighborhood, I live in High Bridge. I have a 32-story building going up right next to the High Bridge, which is actually going to be 60% no, it's affordable, but supportive housing and transition from shelter, right? And suddenly people have that fear because the first thing we do is build. We talk about home ownership. We want to build these great buildings, but then we have a secondary issue. I have a construction background. Our infrastructure is not ready to have that massive build-out that we're talking about. So if we are not going to redo our infrastructure, if we're not going to redo our power lines, my power lines outside of my house was built in 1901. I still have what you call lead feeders in the power lines into my house. If we are not upgrading 3-phase electrical systems throughout our grid, in addition to us trying to electrify all new buildings because we're getting rid of natural gas and all this other stuff, we are not going to be able to do those type of buildings. So as we're trying to get to these green goals, electrification goals, we have to have an understanding that our infrastructure is not ready for that. So what I would also propose in that is that all the focus on housing can't be New York City. We have to focus on transit villages in Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, early parts of Long Island, which it becomes even tougher to get anything done that's as affordable because the NIMBYism of NIMBYism was born in Long Island. So we have to figure out how to spread the housing shortage, not just also in New York City, because our schools aren't ready for it, our infrastructure is not ready for it, our sewage system's not ready for it. Those are impacts that we cannot overlook. In addition to that, we want to make sure that everything doesn't become one monolithic build out. Harlem does not, the central part of Harlem should not become tower buildings. Those brownstones deserve to be there. Our neighborhoods do deserve some preservation and to look like what they originally were built like in their day. We need to keep some of the character of New York. We can't just sacrifice that for the needs. So it has to be a balance. So that's all I'm saying. It does have to be a balance.
Thank you very much. I want to introduce John Zaccaro from the 80th Assembly District. Nice to see you, Assembly Member. And Senator Fernandez from the 34th Senatorial District. I also saw my friend Fidel Molina from the Governor's Office is here, the Bronx representative from the Governor's Office. Thank you for joining us. The next question, when it was presented to me that this is what people wanted to talk about, I remember doing a story for BronxNet about this issue before there was News 12. So we're really talking 30 years ago. So I'm going to read this to you, and everybody in the room is going to go, Housing Court was recently described by a leading publication as a dystopian hell. It serves neither the interests of tenants nor housing providers. Delays adjudicating non-payment proceedings can take years post-COVID, saddling tenants with insurmountable debt and depriving housing providers of much-needed revenue. I have asked this question 30 years ago when I started at BronxNet. We're still asking it. What can the city and state do to solve this crisis? Any thoughts, Senator? We'll start on this end. We'll let you three go, and then we'll come back over here to our friends here. That's right. Let's get that mic. Thank you for stage directing.
Housing court is a disaster. I am practicing lawyer. I practiced in housing court for about 30 years. And I can't think of a more dysfunctional system to handle landlord and tenant issues than the current system that we have. I know, I've lived through it. I've represented both sides. You have cases that go on for months and months and months with nothing resolved, and landlords not being able to pay their bills and tenants not being able to get their apartments repaired. I wish I can tell you what the magic solution is, because it's such a dysfunctional system that you almost have to start from the beginning. One of the things that we try to do recently in the legislature in the state is to provide more funding for housing court so that you could make it work in a way that is at the end of the day, you can say that you had justice in housing court, but it is an awful place to go. It's an awful place to go for tenants. It's an awful place to go for landlords. But I can't tell you exactly what the solution is because it would require a lot of money. Now, I don't mean to say that there is no solution and we shouldn't try, and we are trying. We're trying to get more judges to be placed in those areas where you have a lot of housing court cases. The Bronx, probably one of the poorest, if not the poorest county. We have that issue. But it's all going to take a lot of money from the state to fix what is a never-ending disaster called housing court. Now, I'm going to, again, propose some legislation now in January to see if we can work on remedying some of these problems, making sure that, after a tenant submits an answer, you don't wait 3 months to get an appearance before court. Or, as an attorney, I'm skilled enough I can drag a landlord's attorney in court for 6-7 months. Very easily done. That has to stop because it's not just the landlords that are hurting. It's also the tenant. And so we need to get more money, get more judges, and streamline housing court because it's god awful.
I'm going to add a backup question, and folks can address it. Mostly because I covered the Bronx for all these years. Is it only the Bronx, or is housing court this way across the state? Do you hear it from your colleagues? And if so, maybe then it's a little easier then to get the kind of funding or attention that the senator was talking about.
It's more of a disaster south of the Westchester border, in counties, Yonkers, further north. Part of that is because you don't have as many tenants, let's say, as you do in New York City. Here we have to deal with language access. We have to deal with organizations that help paying the rent. We have to deal with a lot of laws that prevent the cases to move quickly. But the biggest problem is in New York City, and I'd say probably in the Bronx, because we have so many cases.
Thank you. Good morning. Sorry for my tardiness. Just wanted to say greetings, Senator Natalia Fernandez. Thank you for this meeting today with robust questions and real talking points and ideas for next session. Regarding housing court, 100% behind Louis. It's really a mess, and I don't know what the solution is. Honestly, maybe we need a whole doubling of the funding to make another courthouse with a whole set of staff with double the judges just to move things along because of the holdup. And I agree too, and we know it, that it hurts landlords, it hurts tenants, and our housing stock just continues to go into this vicious little cycle. So whatever the solution is, I'm very excited to see your legislation. As a lawyer, we trust that expertise. But yeah, there needs to be something to see these cases moving along in a timely manner and justice given. I represent Westchester as well. I've sat in housing court in New Rochelle, and the complete difference of the bustling, busy, tight, tension-filled room that is the housing court in the Bronx is not like that in New Rochelle. I swear, maybe like 10 people just for that day. It lasted 2 hours, but a lot of the cases and the stories were the same. So I know this problem is statewide. It is very crazy in New York City. I know our colleagues across the boroughs would agree that housing court in their borough is not the best, but whatever the solution needs to be, we welcome all suggestions. I welcome them because there is a lot of pieces to this mess that needs to be addressed to really fix it.
I just want to add one thing, which I remember from having covered this for so many years. I remember the days when housing court was in the basement of the courthouse building on 161st Street, and it was a great fanfare when they got the new space. They said, wow, now and that was going to be the solution. And here I open up, and now we've got the same question that we've always had.
We just provided a bigger building for bigger problems. I mean, look, what my colleagues have said is right. And, I have to highlight the fact that it's no secret that COVID drastically impacted housing court and the impacts that, that we're seeing now is going to be felt for years. Some of my colleagues can speak as the aspect of an attorney and being in housing court. I can speak on the aspect of being a tenant in housing court, growing up and watching my mom go through that process and seeing how much of a jungle it is. And this was when, this was before my teenage years. And so just kind of, fast forwarding now and seeing what it's become is a challenge. and look, there is no right solution, at least right now, right? I think this is going to take a holistic approach. We do need more judges. We need to figure out how do we get these cases in and out of the court system because they don't fare for anyone, not landlords and not tenants. When a tenant has to wait 3 months to be able to get a court case, that's 3 months of rent. They're likely going to be backed up on top of the rent that they're backed up from the reason why they're there in the first place. But what we've done is there are some solution budget funding that helps tenants and homeowners in their homes, right? As part of the budget in the state budget, what we did this year is we enacted and we passed $40 million for the homeowner protection program. And what that does is it's a network that gives 89 nonprofits free housing, counseling, legal services, that promote community stabilization. We did $15 million in additional funding for eviction prevention, legal services, for a total of $50 million, right? And in some cases, this is just a drop in the bucket. This funding, in most cases, was already spent before we even have access to it. And so, another solution, I think, and something that we've talked about and the city council worked on this issue is right to counsel in housing court proceedings. Resolutions within housing court could be moved along, and the massive backlog of cases will be lessened if there was a statewide right to counsel during these proceedings. And many right to counsel is not available, and if at all civil proceedings. And so this is something that we're working on in the state legislature. And so I wanted just to highlight just a few parts of what we've done in the budget to kind of ease some of those burdens while having continuing to have discussions on ways that we can lessen the impact of that. But I agree with my colleagues. This is not going to be, there's not one solution to the problem. And this is going to take, years. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation and look forward to, the discussion as we move forward to figure out how you also think you can contribute to that discussion as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Folks want to weigh in about it? We pretty much got it. All right, let's move on to the next one. The housing crisis, as we know, is real. We've presented it in a number of fronts with the mayor and the governor. We have thousands of units available that cannot be put to market because we can't afford to bring them up to code without some kind of market reset or subsidy. Regulatory agreement properties are allowed to bring apartments to market on vacancy. Rent stabilization is a regulatory agreement that should be treated the same as those with specific project agreements. So, opinions on this? Thoughts? Sure. Jumped right in.
Thank you. I think I mentioned that briefly on my first intervention here, but I'm going to go over one more time. Based on and by the way, my district is number one on eviction for the last 25 years. So when I inherited this job, I would start to look in, what's the cost of the eviction in my district? And we find out that 75% of the people who live in my district pay over 50% of the gross income on rent. So that's something that scares me. That's something that I really put attention. And with solution from a group of you, right, came to my office one time and say, hey, we have around 40,000 units vacant that we want to put back into the market. And we don't have money to invest on those vacant units and put it back into the market the way it is, because we want to reset rent, we have to do this, we have to do that. So we went over the solutions that you guys presented to me, and we went to the mayor office last year, and the mayor agreed to give $25,000 incentive for each one of the apartments that is vacant to put it back into the market. Then we went to the governor, and the governor approved between $25,000 to $50,000 for the same homeowner that want to put those vacant back into the market. However, I know, and someone mentioned supply, but I do know the property taxes is killing us. I know the closing cost is killing us. I know that now the insurance is even worse. And the insurance company doesn't want insurance any, I'm not going to say any, but a lot of the buildings in the Bronx. And this is something that we are working on. This is something that we are looking into it to see what kind of solution we can provide. And that's pretty much what we've been doing at the state. We know that the issue is no one solution. The solution is going to come absolutely from us as a legislator. The solution is going to come from you, us, and some others people involved into the situation.
Bronx housing providers are facing the worst insurance environment in 40 years. Costs have tripled and in some cases quadrupled for liability and property insurance over the past decade, if available at all. To put this in perspective, over $150 of every monthly rent check goes to insurance. The problem is especially dire for rent-regulated housing providers that accept Section 8 and vouchers. So, if insurance is unaffordable or unavailable, what steps can lawmakers take to prevent the collapse of the housing stock in general? Want to weigh in on it?
To prevent the collapse of the housing stock? Oh my God, where's my cape? Yeah, where's my cape? Jeez. Well, we certainly don't want that. So we will be vigorous as we've been in the last session to try to address these issues. I want to give credit to the legislature and the governor for coming up with at least one good first step in the areas of needing to address with the housing situation and helping, yes, some landlords being able to gain those profits back after renovating apartments, but also helping tenants stay in their apartments with the version of good cause. So that's, I think, a great balance that we struck. And I want to keep moving forward in that way as we get into the next session. You know, a lot of your questions, again, is a great agenda to start. And I do think that we need to continue these conversations because the reason why we haven't moved forward is because of the two sides of this situation, the landlords and the tenants and property owners and not. And I think we just need to really keep pushing past that and making sure that we can build in a way that is fair, but also, I guess, protecting of communities, because I do come from a community here in the East Bronx that we do want to protect that character and that low density, but we understand we can find ways to still increase by bringing back to market current apartments, creating some apartments with that option of adult dwelling units. So there's many different options on the table. And I do think if we can, again, find a way to build that support and understanding, we can see more units being built. We can see us preserving more. And in turn, that would help us come out of the hole that we're in.
Specifically in reference to insurance, I've been hearing the issues in insurance across the board in the real estate spectrum. The first place I see it the heaviest is in construction. When I worked at Turner Construction, I was there when we kind of created the OSIP and CSIP insurance program. So basically, that's when the construction companies kind of came together and almost created their own insurance policies because insurance was getting to a certain level that it made projects unaffordable. We're kind of seeing a similar issue on the real estate side. So the question is, how do we create an insurance pool that can lower the cost? Like I know in construction, one thing they're pushing for is that if you're a good actor, you should be in a certain pool. If you're a bad actor, you should be in another pool, and there should be a clear red line between the two. And unfortunately, the good actors have to pay for the bad actors, right? So they're wondering, if I'm a good construction company, why am I paying for the bad construction companies? The second thing is we need to do an analysis of why is it that affordable housing units, specifically that are in certain communities that take Section 8 vouchers, why is it okay for the insurance company to charge them a higher premium than another building, which most likely has higher finishes, most likely has people that live there that are more likely to be litigious, and why are they redlining communities, specifically of color, basically, in poor communities versus the more affluent? Why is the poor paying for most likely where the more affluent housing probably is more expensive to insure in some instances? But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's the flip side. Maybe it is more lawsuits and everything like that in those houses. So we need to do an analysis so we can have a true understanding. The next part, I know that there's concerns about certain laws that we have in construction, such as scaffolding and a couple other things, where the construction industry, again, is saying that's a cost structure. And if you're renovating an apartment, you can have a similar issue, right? Because there might be a chance that you have scaffolding. If you're fixing with local law 11, you're fixing the outside of your building, there's also other questions. What can we do to package our insurance so that it creates more affordability for our contractors, which will lower the cost for the the property managers, property owners. So therefore, the renovation of these vacant units can be a little bit more affordable, or in general, the maintenance of these buildings can be more affordable so that we can lower costs, so we can streamline it so more people in the middle can afford, the working class can stay in our communities. But the insurance issue, one, is going to be a federal issue first, so there's obviously a supremacy clause on that. Second, what I will do is work on how can we make it more efficient in the construction side, and then I think that housing will be a little bit more difficult. But I think if we lower it in construction, we can help the real estate industry by at least 2 or 3%, and maybe hopefully that gives enough margin so that we can make things more affordable.
Thank you very much. Sure, go ahead, sir. Until it's done.
Well, are you trying to have the plaintiff attorneys picket my house with torches? But I'm an attorney, so I'm joking to a small degree, but I definitely understand what you're saying.
Did you want to do? You know what's very interesting to me is somebody in the media. To me, that's a media problem because that I had never heard that about the staging of accidents and all that. That's a very big story, and I've been covering the Bronx for 30 years. The first time I've heard it. So maybe we ought to get our friends in the media to get out. It was on TikTok. You know, I hate to say it, that's not media. Yes. Okay. Incredible. I'm going to talk to some of my media friends about that because that should be a story that's, you know, front page. Wow. What's that? Okay. Yeah, we could pursue it. What we'll do, we'll ask one more formal question, and then if anybody else has other issues they want to bring up, we can do that. The industry has suffered from interest rate hikes resulting in decreased values, making rent-stabilized properties insolvent when loans come due. The crisis presents a threat to real affordable housing as small owners are faced with unsustainable mortgage payments due to values dropping as direct result of doubling rate hikes and nominal rent increases. So what can be done to address this? Anybody want to tackle that? Anybody want to say a word about that? He's got the mic there.
Gary never lets go. Okay.
It's my fault? Is that what you're telling me?
Gary, fix it.
Believe me, I wish.
No, I just wanted to note, but after Assemblymember Deus mentioned the insurance efforts in the construction side, there is an effort now to form an insurance captive that's being led by John Crotty, and it's really among affordable housing developers in the sense that they get subsidies from state and city. But I think that's a model to watch, and if it works, you know, we can. They're receiving some city and state support, so we can think about expanding. I mean, on interest rate hikes, I think I would say two things. One, who's not represented at these tables this morning is our federal representatives because they're in Washington. So no shade that they're not here. But the interest rates and the advocacy around that, of course, lies with them. But then the other piece of the puzzle is just, you know, speculation, right? we all take risks in our respective lives, and in real estate there are risks that are taken to try to turn a larger profit. And when interest rates change and they come due, then that was part of the risk that some folks have calculated, right? So I think that the Signature Bank portfolio in the Bronx, well, it's across the New York City, but I know that I have a very big chunk of Signature Bank portfolio buildings in my district. It highlights the issue that when too much risk is taken on, it's harmful to the city, it's harmful to the tenants, it's harmful to our state. And so just a word of caution on the level of risk being taken on, especially as we face a volatile economy.
Thank you. Folks, you want to weigh in on interest rates? No? So anybody else want to mention it? Thank you very much. We'll just go down for concluding comments. John, do you want to say anything in particular just to the group, or start over there? Go ahead.
No,
I mean, just pass the mic down.
Yeah, sure. Look, I enjoy being able to be part of discussions like this, right? Because as legislators, I think it's important for us to understand, as it is, that we don't have all the answers, and sometimes we live in a world of the unintended consequences, right? Where we see an issue and we want to present the solution, and sometimes we don't. We don't necessarily always know what other people are thinking, or how the solution that we find to a problem is going to impact someone else. And so it's discussions like this in a room full of many of you who are professionals in your industry, that help us kind of and guide us to navigate, when we're thinking about some of these solutions. And not all of them some of them are very complex and not always easy, and so I'm always grateful for this organization, for the work that you guys do. I got to give a big shout out to Ellie, for the work that he does on this. He's also a constituent of mine, and a great supporter, really. But making sure, and I'm telling you, when there's issues, he calls, and he has those discussions because he understands the impact of the work that we do, and ensuring that at the forefront of the solutions that we're looking for, that the association and the people that this organization and this association represents are at the forefront of our minds as we figure out those problems. So I want to thank you all really for being part of today's discussion, and look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Thank you. Maybe I was remiss. Does anybody else have questions that they want to ask about any topic? Yeah, go ahead, Greg. And then we'll go back down the rest of the row.
My name is Gregory Chagranis from Cowboys, the Bronx. I kind of asked this question before, but I'm going to put it in a very succinct fashion at today's legislative breakfast. One thing that's needed is, at least on the city and the state level, when it comes to the vouchers, FEPS, and city FEPS, is that when the voucher goes out, the tenant should have their letter saying whether or not the voucher pays 100%. The reason for this being is that if it's 100%, the realtors don't have the right to check their credit. But if it's not 100%, they do have the right. So what's happening now is the caseworkers are just bullying everybody, and they're saying verbally it's 100%. And then the realtors are left in the middle. If they run the credit, they're at risk of being sued for income discrimination. If they don't run the credit, right, then the landlords have no idea what percentage of, like, what's going, like, who's moving into their business and if they could pay the rent. So there's this massive.
Are you suggesting that that people are being fraudulent in what they say?
No. What I'm
I thought you said that.
the city FEPS and the FEPS program, they have a letter,
Yeah.
right, that says what the tenant pays. If it's zero, their rights are increased because you shouldn't be asking for the credit. If they pay a portion, the landlord has a right. The landlord's rights are being taken away because at this point, they're not giving the letter which they have in order to put the realtor in a situation to then bully them because now they don't know what to do. It's hurting the landlord. It's also putting the realtor in a very difficult situation. And there are multiple situations like this. We're at the point now where the caseworkers just send a voucher. They just send the voucher. The landlord knows nothing about them. And they're like, that's all you need to know. And it's really abusive. And it's anti-landlord and anti-real estate in general. And it's a law that needs to be passed. They have the letter of it. It's in the file. But the caseworkers are telling them not to give it.
Fascinating.
Yes.
Somebody want to respond to that? You wanted to say something, ma'am? Go ahead. Interesting question.
So, yeah. So, look, companies that engage in this type of predatory behavior is just not something that should be tolerated. There are two pieces of legislation. Actually, one that Senator Sepulveda, who just left us, is sponsors in the Senate that prohibits self-storage facility owners from enforcing liens on personal property held in a self-storage facility during state disaster emergencies or state emergencies. And there's another one that my colleague from Queens in the Assembly, Assemblymember Hyman, has that relates to the notice of enforcement of a lien against a self-service storage facility. And what it does basically is it requires a first notice to be delivered or sent within 30 days of the event that triggered the enforcement of the lien, and the second notice to be sent within 45 days of such event, and provides that public or private sale of the goods be removed from the storage space may occur 60 days after such notification. This was a question actually that I went into a deep dive with my staff, and we're having discussions and figuring out how we can introduce legislation this upcoming session in January that speaks directly to the excessive fees at storage facilities. And so I appreciate the input.
Is the problem really legislation or enforcement, or both?
Both.
Both.
Right, because the devil's in the details, right? It's in the small print, and the small print will tell you that this is just a 2-month promotional opportunity. So you come in. Right. Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's the legislative part of this question. I didn't mean to run by Greg's question. If anybody wanted to respond to that.
Oh, I'm fancy. It's only because we're at the end. No, so I wanted to clarify that it's the law is against source of income discrimination, not income discrimination. If you don't have enough money to pay for something, you can't afford it, then that's not discrimination. That's just business, right? But source of income discrimination is saying that you can't discriminate because it's a voucher versus it being from a job versus it being cash, right? So just clarifying that point. Like you can run a credit check if you need to run a credit check, but you can't say no because the source is a voucher versus something. Okay, I'm sure we know that, but just to say it out loud. The other part of it, there are so many issues with the way that the city administers the FEPS program, right? I will fight every single day until my last to expand the amount that we, as a city, as a state, are putting into voucher programs because it helps people to pay their rent. But the administration of it, the staffing of it, the communication to landlords, the communication between landlord and tenant and brokers, it's really a mess. And so just want to open the door to any and all suggestions. The city council has been taking a deep dive into the operations of like the administration of these programs. And so we're looking at legislative reforms to force the city's hand, make staffing ratios, right? Like what can we do to make sure that the city can process what we have funded, right? It's a big problem, and just want to welcome everybody to, chime into me as the housing chair, but also the general welfare committee and all of us. We can do better.
All right, so now we'll continue.
Sure. I just want to say that's worth looking into. We support vouchers. I support vouchers. We know that is something helpful to tenants and landlords. But if there's leaks in the system, then we should look into it. We don't want anything that we do in the city and state to be falling through the cracks and whatever, things happening are happening. But I'm excited to continue these conversations because, again, this is now the next step in what we need to do to fix our housing problem. The storage unit was a brand new situation to me, and I didn't even have time to do the research. We got these at 7 o'clock last night, and I didn't get to do my homework. But it is a big problem, and in a way, again, abuse by a property owner, because not saying that all of us do it, but there are some that take advantage of the fact that we're not reading the small print. So I'm going to definitely look into those bills and looking forward to yours. But there is a lot to do, and finding the solution to the insurance problem is something that I really do want to see happen, because on all fronts, and we just saw now even with cars and Uber drivers, like the insurance is going up everywhere, and that's really going to hurt all of us, because if we can't afford it, what are we going to do? But I do thank you guys. Thank you again for your continued insight and conversations and suggestion of solutions, because I think all of us, with all of our bits of mind and expertise and thoughts and prayers sometimes, we need to know what's actually possible and what makes sense as we move forward. So thanks.
Yeah. So, I think all of us here understand that the issues in front of us are complicated, and I wish there was just a 2 + 2 = 4 solution. The reality is a 2 + 2 = 7 solution, and there is no absolute number that's going to get us where we need to go. With that said, New Yorkers are never scared of a challenge, and we have to have a vision of leadership and be bold in our actions if we're trying to fix something that is coming. We have a wave coming right at us, and we have a couple ways we can respond. If you're on the beach and a big wave is coming at you, you can try to surf over it, you can try to dive through it, or you go under it. But if you sit there and do nothing, the wave is going to crush you. So the reality is we have to act in a prudent, smart, collaborative way where we have to do a better job of including the industries that will be impacted with the advocates at the same time. No legislation that is one-sided is often the right way. When my old boss used to say, if both people aren't upset after the negotiations, you didn't do your job. Reality is both sides have to give something in order to move somewhere. And that is what we have to come to. And that takes leadership, that takes vision, and that takes some bold steps, which sometimes is not going to make you popular. But sometimes doing the right thing is always the most important thing. And if we keep that in mind as legislators, as a state, as a city, local, as advocates, as business industry leaders, I think therefore we can get New York the direction we need to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellie, for inviting me. Well, reminding me that I was invited and making sure I came. um, and everyone here, just thank you for your partnership. I see familiar faces that come out to hearings and that are really a part of the process. And I want to just invite that from all of you. We have city council hearings on a range of topics, but I'm going to be selfish and say the Housing and Buildings Committee, we meet at least once, if not twice a month, although I'm about to take a short break. And just want to invite you into those conversations. Like this year, we're passing the electric code, an update to the electric code. We're hopefully going to be passing J51. So it's a lot of wonky, important stuff that I know that you all care about. And just to your analogy on 2 + 2, it's not 2 + 2 = 4. I would say it's like a to the x plus 2b4 double differential 3k. That's the kind of math that we're dealing with in terms of some of these problems. But we have the brains, right? We have the people and the talent in the city of New York. As long as we're able to come together and put our heads together, we can figure out these problems. We won't fix them right away, right? They've been around for longer than you and I have, right? But we can make progress. I'm going to end with one of my analogies, which is, people in the community always ask me, like, why would you run for office? Like, you're never going to solve these problems. You could have done anything else. And I say, well, why does a doctor become a doctor? There's always going to be sick people. You work with what you have in front of you and try to make the world a better place with what's in front of you. And I think that's what we can all do together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. People say to me, how do you know when you've had a good show? And I always say, I know it's been a good show if I learned something. And I certainly learned a lot. I really appreciate our elected officials. Folks know a lot more than I thought you did. And that I've given you credit for over the years. But we'll have you all back on our program. Speaking of the program, I want to mention Michael Max, who's here, our executive director. I know Walter Garr is here, and BronxNet is covering it like we covered just about everything in the borough of the Bronx. We want to thank our sponsors, Novick, Edelstein, Pomerantz PC, Tyrax Realty Management Incorporated, Jerome Environment Services, LLC, KZA Realty Group Incorporated, and Langsom Property Services. So we want to thank all those folks. And Ellie, good luck. Congratulations. Justice rules. Let's remember our Constitution. And folks, we'll see you around town. Yes, my 30th anniversary will be next Monday night. We'll have the borough president to help us celebrate. And we'll just keep going every week with something else. See you all. Thank you.